All right. Hello, friends and enemies, and whatever government organizations are listening in. This is Ted Livermore, joined by my good friend Justin Abramson. And today we're going to talk about the time that the Soviet Union bought a lot of grain from the United States. So in 1972, Justin, the Soviet Union secretly bought 18 million metric tons of wheat and corn sold to them at subsidized prices by America's largest agricultural companies. Now, Justin, I'm not sure how well versed you are in American history, but in 1972, the Soviet Union, not a big fan of the United States.
And the United States not a big fan of the Soviet Union either. I don't think either of these two countries were getting along.
No, they were not. And yet we still sold them 18 million metric tons. Now, the result of this sale caused food prices to increase drastically in the United States. It helped accelerate the shift from family farms to major agribusiness companies in the United States, and it even changed NASA's satellite strategy. So this is the story of how Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger conspired against American farmers and consumers to help Nixon win re-election.
Wow. Okay. So I'm looking forward to learning about this, Ted. I'm excited to hear more about it. I thought that was the Southern strategy, but I must have the wrong election, and so clearly I've got the wrong year or something like that. But sure, let's learn more about grain sales to Soviets. Certainly one of the more powerful U.S. events in the game of Twilight Struggle, and I want to know more.
Yeah. So the Southern strategy was Nixon's original strategy. This was for re-election purposes. Okay. So. Four things of note here. So Richard Nixon, he was elected president for the first time in 1968. He took office in 1969. One of the primary ways he won office was he campaigned on a promise to end the Vietnam War, which at the time hugely unpopular in the United States, famously the source of a ton of discontent, protest, et cetera, et cetera. So Nixon said, hey, you know what? The Democrats, Kennedy, Johnson got us into this. I'll get us out of this mess. I'll bring our boys home.
That and racism.
Yes, there was also
yes.
also racism.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
continue. That's not what we're talking about today, but yes. Okay, continue.
So the first way he decided that he was going to end the war, him and his buddy, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, they decided that they were going to start secretly and illegally carpet bombing Cambodia and Laos. Now, I think the important thing to note here, Justin, Cambodia and Laos, neither of those are the country of Vietnam where the United States was at war with.
They are adjacent, and they are. They're close to the country.
Yeah.
Like Iraq is close to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But it's not the same country.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was so we decided that we were going to bomb countries we were not at war with to win a war against another country. So shockingly, that strategy does not work. So by 1971, 2 years into Nixon's presidency, we're still at war. We are as deep in the quagmire as we have ever been, and Nixon's approval rating starts to plummet. In January of 1971, it falls below 50% for the first time. Now, right around the end of 71, there was a really harsh winter in the Soviet Union. And what this does, at the time, the Soviet Union was actually by far the largest producer of grain, mainly wheat, in the world. And so the winter of 1971 and 1972 led to a drastic fall in Soviet wheat production.
Probably a drastic improvement and drastic increase in the production of those winter hats that they all seem to wear.
Yes.
I would imagine. So that winter hat business probably soared. But okay, grain production not so good. Continue.
Yeah. So this leaves them unable to feed their population. They're, again, huge wheat producer, huge wheat exporter, but also really important for them, for the Soviet Union to feed their population. And now let's fast forward about a year and a half, and by the summer of 1973, wheat prices in the United States had tripled, and Americans were experiencing sharp inflation all over the grocery store. So the real question, Justin, is how are these four things related? Nixon becomes president, his approval rating goes low, Soviet wheat crop failure, and all of a sudden, Americans are paying for more at the grocery store.
Yeah, I wonder that myself. Nixon, my general kind of growing up learning about Richard Nixon, that he wasn't a great guy. Maybe a little bit dishonest. Maybe tried to put one or two over on the American people. I get some vague recollection of that. But obviously, if the president does it, then it's not illegal. Please, I want to learn more about how you can connect these four events.
It's funny that you bring up Nixon, because we're gonna walk through a couple of the key players in what was dubbed the quote Great Grain Robbery. So first up is our buddy Dick. Here he is, 37th president of the United States, also the only president to ever resign from the office of the presidency. Also somebody whose name is coming up quite a bit these days. Don't know why that's happening. Probably just a coincidence. So I think the one thing that I do really want to point out for people who may not be familiar with Richard Nixon, you may have heard about Watergate, that he was a little shady. For most of this story, it is very likely that he was blackout drunk during it. Through the entire thing, the bombing of Cambodia, the secret wheat deals, the breaking into campaign offices, making secret recordings, all of it. Was likely blackout drunk. So he took prescription medication that made him extremely have extremely low tolerance for alcohol, but that didn't stop him from drinking alcohol. He would often drink multiple whiskey drinks in a given day, and would very quickly become almost incoherent and often wouldn't remember the night before.
And just to be super clear, we're talking about this is a man who's going to be making incredibly important decisions, potentially under the influence of said drinks.
Oh yeah, this is the guy with the nuclear codes.
So this is not a guy who's having a little whiskey, having a little snifter or something right before bed, and he'll be fine in the morning. This is a man who's making just hammered all the time. That's great. That's great.
Yeah, purportedly one night he got so drunk and got all emotional that there were a bunch of hippies protesting him on the National Mall, that he basically snuck out of the White House with only his limo driver, so no Secret Service protection, none of that. Went to the National Mall. All of the hippies were doing a sleep-in at the Lincoln Memorial, and he woke a bunch of them up to ask why they hated him so much.
Okay.
So just think about being, this hippie protester during the Vietnam War. You're sleeping on the floor, the granite floor of the Lincoln Monument. You get woken up in the middle of the night, and it is the blackout drunk president of the United States asking why you don't like him.
Oh my God. Okay. I'm having a difficult time imagining that. I will be honest with you, but okay.
Yeah. So as a result of that incident, the Secret Service actually had to redo all of their policies so that now they don't let presidents sneak out of the White House blackout drunk anymore.
Doesn't seem like a good idea.
Yeah. So anyways, during this whole scheme with the selling grain to the Soviets in secret, probably blackout drunk.
You keep saying scheme and plan and all this stuff, but weren't we just doing them a solid? Seems like we were being real friendly to them by selling them grain. They need grain. We're selling it to them. Richard Nixon's just being a nice guy, right? That sounds like what Richard Nixon is.
Well, if Richard Nixon was being a nice guy, I can tell you who wasn't being a nice guy, and that is our man Henry Kissinger. So Henry Kissinger, and I'm not going to get too deep in here. We could go for hours on this, but he was Richard Nixon's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Really, all you need to know, bad dude. He's a bad dude. Really, all he wants in life, he is still alive, by the way, all he wants in life is power. He was willing to kill tens of thousands of people, which he most certainly did in Southeast Asia and other places. He's also a traitor in trying to help Richard Nixon get elected on a platform partially of ending the Vietnam War. Kissinger actually sabotaged peace talks that the Johnson administration was in with the North Vietnamese. So the Vietnam War could have ended in the late 60s if not for Henry Kissinger.
Well, that doesn't make sense to me because Richard Nixon wanted to end the Vietnam War. That's what he said. And then, what you're telling me is that Richard Nixon just wanted to get elected president of the United States, not so much end the war. Wanted to.
He wanted to end the war. He didn't want the war to end. He wanted to end the war.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And
yes,
so,
of course. He wanted to be the one to end the war and get the credit for getting us out of that goddamn plague.
Yeah. And so our man Henry was more than happy to pass national security secrets on to a foreign adversary in order to prevent that. So, anyways, that's Henry. So now we're going to shift gears into some of the lesser known players. So people you may not have heard of, and that starts with our buddy Earl L. Butz. Now, Butz, although you may not have heard of him, incredibly important, not only to this story, but also to really the story of American food since the 1970s. So he was Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture. So that means that he heads up the USDA, the FDA, etc. He also really kind of deserves his own story. So he was nicknamed the King of Corn because he shifted U.S. farm policy in such a way that two things happened. One, there is probably no single person more responsible for the obesity epidemic in the United States than our man Butz here. The second thing is he really, and partially as a result of this grain sales to Soviet scheme, accelerated that change from American family farms to consolidating basically all of the food that we consume in this country into the hands of 5 major companies.
Wait a minute. Corn syrup is bad for you?
Yes, corn syrup is not good. But Mr. Butz leveraged U.S. farm policy, including advertisements and public messaging that, corn is a vegetable. And so the sugar that we make from corn must also be a vegetable.
Yeah.
So I don't want to derail us too much, but I just could not help myself.
Can we go back to that slide for just a moment? Is Mr. Butz, is he one of the 2 men pictured on this Twilight Struggle card? Who are these people? Yes,
I don't know who the guy in the back is, but yes, that is Butz, front and center. Very excited to talk about his terrible agriculture policies.
Ah, very exciting.
Yeah, so that's him right there.
And corn is a vegetable, therefore corn syrup must be good
for you.
Is our logic there.
Yeah.
And Doritos must also be good.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so just not to get too off topic here, but just to prove my point, here's a chart of the American obesity rate over time, and I have very helpfully pointed out where Mr. Butz became the agricultural secretary. And I don't know, Justin, if you notice anything about these lines, but they start going up after he starts putting policies in place.
So in college, I was a math and economics double major, and so I actually had exposure to a lot of charts, graphs, numbers, regressions, things like that. And one thing, as I think about my expertise in that area, what I see here is that we have a line that is a little bit flat, and then we see a particular event, and then all of a sudden things start going up. Mm-hmm. And so you wonder when that happens, Ted. Again, I know you were a creative writing major. Maybe you're not familiar with this, but when that happens, you look. Okay, well, could that event have caused that increase? What's the causal relationship there? So yes, it would seem on the face of it that this event of Mr. Butz becoming the secretary could have caused some of this obesity. I'm not sure how that happened, but it seems like we just talked about this corn syrup thing, which again I'm confused. Corn's a vegetable. Vegetables are good. My mother always said, "Eat your vegetables." I eat my vegetables. Anyway.
Yeah, I think this is Justin. I think you statisticians would call this correlation. I believe.
It's correlated. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, anyways, I digress. Lastly, in the scheme, we have this little weasel. His name is Clarence Palmby.
I've never heard of this guy.
Yeah, no one has. I literally could not find anything about him except for his involvement in this scheme and then his obituary. So I know that he was Assistant Secretary of Agriculture for Foreign Trade and Commodity Programs. I know he was a dick face, and I know he's dead. That's pretty much it. But he and there are a couple of other little weasels involved in this that are very similar to Mr. Palmby here. So I'm picking on him a little bit, but he is emblematic of how this scheme was pulled off. So those are the key players. So what was the actual plan here? So remember, Nixon campaigned on ending the Vietnam War. He then is having trouble because it turns out bombing countries that aren't Vietnam is not helping to end the war.
Okay.
I know.
Okay. Yes. All right.
His approval rating is dropping. And so he needs to find another way. We can't bomb other countries to end the war. What are we going to do? So he decides that what he's going to do is he's going to take advantage of the Soviet Union having this terrible wheat crop due to a really bad winter. He is going to sell them grain at super cheap prices in exchange for them pressuring their allies in North Korea to reach a peace accord with the United States. So that's how Richard Nixon's gonna get reelected. But there's a problem, because if the public, if American farmers know that we're about to sell a bunch of grain to the Soviets, they're gonna be like, well, the price is gonna go up. So I am going to hold on to my wheat and I'm going to wait for the price to go up, and then I will sell it and make more profit.
This seems like something that would be good for Richard Nixon, but not necessarily good for the American people. Has Richard Nixon done anything else like that?
Not that I can think of. No, I'm sure this was just a momentary lapse in judgment. Yes, a plan that took several years to execute. But okay. So the Soviets are desperate for wheat, so we're going to sell it to them, and they're in turn again going to pressure the North Vietnamese to end the war. Now, because we can't let this go public, because then the wheat wouldn't be cheap to sell to the Soviets, and the whole scheme would fall apart. Now, there's one problem to this. So we can about this whole keeping it secret thing. The problem is that employees at the USDA are mandated to share information that would be relevant to the public, to American farmers, that might affect the market, prices, etc. And so what they come up with, and this is where our little weasel Palmby comes in, is that right after he finishes negotiating this deal with the Soviets, he resigns from the USDA and he takes a job with the company that is now Cargill. He gets a cushy executive job so that he is no longer bound by those disclosure laws in government.
Okay, and so then we're putting people in charge who don't know this stuff, and so they're not going to disclose it.
Correct. Exactly. Okay. Yes. So then people who weren't involved in these negotiations, they take over positions like the one Palmby have. They don't know anything because there's nothing to disclose. As a side note, there was also a little issue that they had where they were asking all these union dock workers to fill Soviet ships with wheat, and these unionized dock workers were like, "Wait, those are bad guys. We don't want. Why are we going to give them food?" And so the Nixon administration manages to convince them to do it in exchange for $600 million worth of shipbuilding contracts. So they also bought off the unions as part of this scheme as well.
Okay, all right. So they're covering everything.
Yes, it's quite the scheme. So we are going to secretly. We're going to hide from American farmers that we're going to do this deal so we can get a bunch of wheat for super cheap. We're going to sell it to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is going to tell the North Vietnamese to put down their guns. Richard Nixon is going to be a hero for winning the war, and he will be reelected, and Henry Kissinger will remain Secretary of State and have an immense amount of power to bomb countries that we are not at war with.
I mean, sounds good for them.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So there are two prongs to this. So one is the negotiations with the Soviet Union. So again, these are held in secret. So our good friends Kissinger, Butz, and Palmboy are flying back and forth between Moscow and Washington. While they're doing this, the press is sort of like, hey, why are you flying to Moscow to negotiate? And they're making up all sorts of excuses about what they're negotiating about. They're saying all the negotiations failed, etc., etc. At the same time they're doing this, Henry Kissinger is sending memos to the Department of Agriculture telling them that they basically need to keep quiet because in February of 1972, they meet with the 6 largest grain exporting companies in the United States in secret in Kansas City to arrange this sale, okay? And the best thing about this is not only are they arranging with these large grain companies in the United States, they also said, hey, you know what? We're going to subsidize. We're going to pay you so you can go buy wheat from U.S. farmers, and then you can turn around and sell it at a profit to the Soviet Union.
Okay, so a lot of people here, it seems like, are getting paid off. A lot of people getting bribed, paid off. A lot of skids being greased here, so that Richard Nixon can be reelected president, and that we can continue, so we can just continue to kind of bomb whatever countries we want. Is the end goal here?
Well, there's one group that's not getting paid off, Justin, and that would be U.S. farmers.
Yes.
Because in February of 1972, the USDA, which is responsible for forecasting U.S. crop production and therefore market prices, deliberately exaggerates U.S. wheat supplies in an intentional effort to depress prices in the United States, again, so that that grain can be cheaper to sell to the Soviets. So USDA says, oh boy, there's so much wheat. We've never seen so much wheat like you wouldn't believe. Many people are saying it's the most wheat we've ever seen. So U.S. farmers, many in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, they sell off their entire winter crop of hard red winter wheat, some of it at a loss. In the spring of 1972, because the USDA, which is supposed to guide them, says so much wheat.
So they're panicking.
Yes, basically, and also they're saying like there's no point in storing because they are able to store it, right? There's no point in storing it for later because there's so much that the prices are probably only going to go down, right? So might as well just sell it for what we can right now. What they don't know is that in July of 1972, the Soviet Union buys 440 million bushels of grain from the 6 private grain exporting companies that Henry Kissinger had secretly arranged to subsidize their purchase of U.S. grain to sell to the Soviet Union at a profit.
Great. Wow, what a plan. All right, well, that all sounds obviously really corrupt, lots of bribery going on, lots of American farmers just, getting hosed. But, Ted, I'm trying to remember back to history class in, high school, but I don't think we won the Vietnam War, right? I don't think it ended well for us. And so, so I guess my question is, did it work? Did all the problems that we were having get solved? Obviously, Richard Nixon did get reelected, but did all this good stuff happen, or was it just a total failure?
It's a great question, Justin. So, sale happens in July 1972. It becomes public in August of that year. So it's immediately dubbed the Great Grain Robbery. And those 440 million bushels represents 80% of the entire U.S. wheat crop that's used for food production. So again, sold at artificially low prices to the Soviet Union, 80% of the wheat we use for food in this country, making these grain exporting companies rich, allowing weasels like Palm Boy to go take executive jobs at companies like Cargill, which he, by the way, kept for his entire life until he died, according to his obituary, and helps Richard Nixon get reelected. Now, it wasn't only farmers that got screwed by this. By 1973, food inflation had ballooned because grain, it's not only grain itself, it's not just what you make from grain, it's not bread, it's not just bread, etc. It's all of this grain, corn, etc. gets turned into feed for animals. Yep. So meat prices go up, dairy prices go up. Overall, the farm price index went up 66%. So this is Richard Nixon's America here.
66%?
Yes.
Okay, so food is all of a sudden scarce, now way more expensive. So you're going to Whole Foods, and all of a sudden your prices there for your organic gluten-free food. Well, actually, gluten-free food that's a really bad example because wheat has gluten in it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, wheat's got gluten in it. So 66% higher. Okay.
But it really ripples through our entire food production system too, right? Because it's not just your organic wheat, but so much like corn stalk and stuff is turned into feed for animals, which makes it more expensive to feed dairy cows, which means the price of milk is going up. Like it ripples through, right? And so you see tripling of wheat prices here. but it ripples through the American economy, right? And so overall food inflation, and I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, Justin, but often food and energy are two of the biggest drivers of overall inflation. And again, I don't know how much you remember or how much you learned about the 1970s and the economy in the United States, but inflation was a real problem, and this is one of the biggest causes of it.
Yes, people don't like paying a lot of money at the grocery store and at the gas station.
Correct.
So the American people probably were mad about this and voted Nixon out in a landslide, and then replaced this just corrupt government with hardworking, honest folks who are going to get things back on track for the American farmers. Right? Is that what happened?
Well, Justin, I don't know if you know, Richard Nixon is a Republican, and therefore he is on the side of hardworking American farmers, real Americans, pro-business, et cetera, et cetera. I do want to point out, not to be super American-centric about this, the other thing, because we sold off 80% of the wheat we use for food, we didn't have any extra to provide food assistance to developing countries, so we drastically slashed the amount of food assistance that we're giving to developing countries, contributing to food insecurity in those countries. The other thing this does is NASA gets involved, because what happened was the reason that they were able to kind of engineer this secret sale in the first place was because the wheat crop failure in the Soviet Union that happened in the winter of 71 and 72 was not public knowledge. Obviously, the Soviet Union wasn't super excited about publicizing this, right? They were embarrassed. They don't want the world to know that they can't feed their people. And so our spy agencies knew about this, but the American public, the American press didn't. So NASA, as a result, actually decides to launch what they call Landsat-1. So it's the first ever satellite devoted specifically to monitoring crop production. So they're able to take pictures, right, of wheat fields across the entire world, and they're able to see from those pictures how the crop is doing. So after this, the idea was, with the help of NASA, there's no more keeping this kind of thing secret.
Okay. So we want to make sure that this kind of stuff just never happens again. But again, my question is, so here's lots of bad things that happened. And I asked you, it was obviously a rhetorical question. I do know that Nixon got reelected. But what benefit did we get?
Well,
if I'm going to, and you know what, I know that your audience for these podcasts is not merely a Twilight Struggle audience, but why is grain sales a U.S. event? This sounds like a catastrophe. Shouldn't grain sales be a USSR event?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the other thing about this is, as it relates to the Vietnam War, not only did the Soviet Union fail to put enough pressure on the North Vietnamese to end the war, they actually took some of the grain, again, 80% of our wheat crop that we use for food, they actually took some of that and supplied it to the North Vietnamese, which then obviously turned it over to their army. So some of the wheat that was essentially stolen from American farmers in order for Richard Nixon to get elected actually went to enemy soldiers to feed them so they could help kill Americans. So bravo. So yeah, Richard Nixon still manages to get elected. We can dive into the 1972 election at some other point. I think a large reason for that is the Democrats not really having a serious contender there. I think that was a real failure of the Democratic Party.
That was McGovern, right?
Yeah.
Begging is better than bombing?
Correct. Yeah. So not real strong, which, uncharacteristic of the Democratic Party in this country. Usually is just super competent, ready to stand up for what's right and fight. And a deep bench of great talent who are behind that person as well.
Yes. Just lots of people who you look at and say, wow, I mean, that person just looks like the president. 10 or 15 people per election cycle, you say, well, wow, these people are all great choices. How can I pick just one?
Yeah, just a ton of competence and not out there just to enrich themselves. But anyways, so we eventually we're really never able to negotiate peace in Vietnam, and we sort of just pull out. You might have seen some pictures of people clinging to helicopters that are taking off in the U.S. Embassy as South Vietnam fails. certainly we learned our lesson from that sort of chaotic withdrawal from countries that we decided to invade, overseas, and that would never happen again. We'll never see images of desperate people clinging to our military aircraft, trying to get out.
Oh.
That definitely will not happen again after 1975. So that's good.
Yes, it's a good thing that we no longer elect corrupt politicians and get involved in foreign quagmires that we can never get out of.
Definitely.
I'm glad that we don't do that anymore.
Learned our lesson.
I know we may have an international audience here, but obviously America is held, of course, in the highest regard because we just don't do these things.
No.
Other countries can do them. Third world countries. But this stuff just doesn't happen in the United States.
No, in shithole countries, but
not
not
that's
here.
exactly
No,
yes.
Yeah, exactly. So Nixon, for his part, not a lot of remorse. He was quoted as saying in the aftermath, once it became public, quote, "I took the farmer out of his own selfish little role and made him play a big role in the world."
Okay. I've never heard this before.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what to make of this. Ted, I don't.
Oh, boy.
What? I mean, yeah. Okay. Look,
I robbed American farmers. In doing so, I helped them play a big role in the world.
I mean, okay. So, look, I've taken enough history to know that Richard Nixon was not a great guy, but this is okay. This is ridiculous.
So, but Justin, to your point, this was not the only time that we sold grain to the Soviet Union. The first sale was actually in 1963. There were a couple of smaller ones in the late 60s, obviously this one. But this practice actually continued throughout the 1970s and through the 80s, and actually became a big scandal because Jimmy Carter, he was obviously elected in 1976 after Nixon resigned in disgrace, and he actually cut off all grain sales to the Soviet Union, which by that time the Republicans had decided that no, it was a good thing to sell wheat to our enemy, and it was hurting American farmers because, of course, now after this scandal, all of these sales were public knowledge. So farmers were actually starting to make a profit because we were exporting so much grain to the Soviet Union. So Jimmy Carter orders an embargo of this because the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, which is, again, another place that we would never get involved with. We would definitely leave people in the rest of the world to manage their own affairs. So Jimmy Carter orders a wheat embargo against the Soviet Union because of their invasion of Afghanistan. And during the 1980 election, or I guess that would be the 1980 election, Ronald Reagan absolutely hammers Jimmy Carter over this issue, saying you're hurting American farmers by refusing to sell grain to our primary enemy. And as soon as Reagan takes office, he reverses that. Now, one of the good things about Reagan is much like his brain during his presidency, he sold a bunch of wheat that was rotting to the Soviet Union. So throughout the 80s, we shipped millions and millions and millions of tons of grain to the Soviet Union, much of which had mold in it.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, I know I sometimes go to the grocery store and, I pick out food or I pick out fruit or whatever and I bring it home and my wife looks at it and says, "Justin, this has mold on it. Why did you get this?" And so it's good to know that the Soviets were doing the same thing as well. Because, they obviously need to look closer at the crops that they're importing. So, I guess excellent job by Reagan there.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's pretty much it, Justin. So I really appreciate it. Again, just to recap, okay? Secretly sell wheat, take wheat from American farmers, sell it to your enemy, get reelected. That's the plan.
That's the plan. Yeah, corruption works here in the U.S. You do bad things and get rewarded. Is the lesson there just in general here? In general, yeah. Good to know. All right, Justin. Well, that's it. So thanks everybody for joining us, and tune in next time to learn about how the United States definitely learns its lesson. That's great. I'm so glad to hear that, Ted. Thank you for being a special guest host on our Twitch stream today. And I look forward to the next installment. And but that's gonna do it for today. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next time.